Harry Potter, The Hunger Games, Forrest Gump, Legally Blonde, Cinderella. What do all of these movies have in common? I'll give you a quick hint. Take a closer look at the main characters. In Harry Potter, it's an orphan stranded in a family that hates basically everything about him, starting with the fact that he's a wizard. Cinderella, another orphan with an evil stepmother that forces her to do lots of hard work and essentially also hates her. Hunger Games, a girl from the poorest district forced to take part in deadly games. Legally Blonde, basically the dumb blonde girl stereotype in a movie. Forrest Gump is dismissed for his disability. So what's the quality that all of these characters share? They're all simply powerless, underestimated, dismissed as a failure. Another thing they have in common is that they, against all odds, overcome their weaknesses and essentially become the winner at the end of the movie. Harry Potter defeats Voldemort, Alice studies law at Harvard.
What, like it's hard?
Katniss actually wins the Hunger Games, and Cinderella gets the prince. And Forrest Gump runs a whole lot, but anyway, we oftentimes see characters who the world doesn't expect to win, underdogs, surpass themselves and win anyway. And it seems to be a technique that works, because one last fact that these characters all have in common is that their movies were all a huge success. It is the most basic formula, an unlikely winner. Even incredibly old stories such as David and Goliath, where a young boy defeats a giant warrior with nothing but a slingshot and a stone, integrated. So today, let's talk about why it works. Why does it resonate across cultures and with different kinds of people? What's the psychology behind literally the oldest trick in the book? And spoiler alert, the answer is a bit deeper than just to say, well, they're relatable, although that is part of the equation. The first one is our instinct for fairness. Much like particles, when they feel like the concentration in two spaces isn't balanced and want to compensate. Sorry, I wanted to include that joke because we're currently talking about that in biology. Anyway, humans have always been obsessed with fairness. From an evolutionary standpoint, this actually makes sense. In early tribes, unfair treatment could mean starvation or death because groups needed to work together, and being unfairly treated by anyone could essentially mean death because you only rely on each other and what resources that you had back then. So our brains develop what's called a justice sensitivity. There are studies that show that even toddlers cry or react when they see unfair situations, like one child getting candy and another doesn't. But of course, there are exceptions to this, as with everything. And this instinct carries over into storytelling. When Harry Potter, a kid locked in a cupboard or a dresser, closet is it? Yeah. When Harry Potter is pitted against the most powerful wizard alive, Voldemort, our brains scream, well, that's unfair. And cheering for him is like correcting that balance between he actually doesn't stand a chance and he should, because everything should be fair. And thus, supporting the weaker side feels like restoring fairness. This is why in sports, for example, neutral fans oftentimes cheer for the team that's losing or disadvantaged. Obviously, of course, there are, again, exceptions to this. Not everyone does this. Here's another big word. A study from Stanford shows Here's another big word. A study from Stanford University shows that humans show something called inequity aversion. We dislike unequal outcomes enough to sacrifice to correct them. We also have something called the just world motive, which means we want outcomes that essentially make sense. Because when the weak triumph Because when weak people triumph justly in a way that makes us feel like it is just, it restores order without forcing us to blame the victims. And when the stronger ones abuse power, we crave correction by cheering them on. And all the while, we, of course, identify with the weaker one. This is, by the way, the more shallow point that I talked about in the beginning. We feel empathy, basically. Most of us don't see ourselves as the strongest, richest, or most privileged person in the room. Of course, there are exceptions, but when you're average, you don't see yourself as or when you think you're average, you don't see yourself as like the best person, most privileged ever, like at least most people wouldn't. And that means that we naturally relate more to those who are underestimated or weaker. And by cheering for the underdog, we're projecting our own struggles onto them, and when they win, it feels like we are too. It's a safe way to experience victory without actually having to overcome the impossible odds, which in real life is actually pretty unlikely, but we'll talk about that later. In psychology, the underdog effect is actually a known phenomenon, as this article states. There's a psychological bias called effort justification, which is rooted in Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory. I don't know what that means either, but we value outcomes more when they come with effort or struggle. So when we see Elle Woods study tirelessly for Harvard Law after being laughed at, or Katniss having to endure the brutality of the Hunger Games, we value their victory more than when it comes easily. Their win feels like it actually means something because the path there was so hard. So it seems like humans are literally wired to this storytelling technique. And of course, people have noticed that. If you've ever written a short story, a novel, or anything that requires you to use storytelling techniques, you're probably familiar with something called the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell's hero journey framework tells us to start with a weak or ordinary character who then undergoes trials and transformation, essentially loses and has a very, very bad starting point to finally win or achieve something that initially seemed impossible. And not only storytellers use this technique, but also companies who often position themselves as the David in the David versus Goliath battle. And this is especially true for newcomers or startups who want to stand a chance against bigger companies, and then they try to evoke empathy to make them pay, essentially. And this all seems pretty great, right? But here's the thing. The underdog effect can also be used as a manipulation technique, as with pretty much every psychological phenomenon. In politics, for example, a politician can make themselves out to be the underdog to gain sympathy. They might downplay their advantages or privileges and make them seem more like us, essentially, to appeal to the voter, which creates a very unrealistic picture. And of course, we shouldn't be voting for politicians out of sheer sympathy. And regarding the company part, not only small companies use this strategy, which I think is pretty fair, but also larger ones. But this can obscure the fact that these companies are actually powerful players with significant resources who are actually just lying to everyone else to gain sympathy and gain more clients against maybe other bigger, even bigger companies when they are already huge. Another downside of the underdog effect is that it can create unrealistic expectations. This one I don't 100% agree with, but I think there's some truth to it. When we root for the underdog, we often do so with the hope that they will defy all odds and achieve the improbable victory. And while seeing this can be motivating, it essentially sets us up for disappointment when the underdog fails, and especially when that underdog is us. Because in real life, like I said, these things don't usually happen, but are the exception. And this can be a burden on us. Like, we need to defy the odds, we need to achieve the impossible when truthfully our chances are low. At least if we're not privileged. We're talking about like being an actual underdog here. If you aren't privileged, then you have lower chances at achieving success, obviously. How our future looks is largely determined by our upbringing, and it is true that some people can work themselves to the top even when they started from the bottom. You would still need a ton of luck to make that happen, and maybe you don't have that luck, and then you can't change anything about that, and these movies make you feel like, well, you just need to work a bit harder, or whatever, you don't deserve it. It's your fault, when essentially it's not. Because for every Steve Jobs, there's like tens of thousands of people with the same abilities that won't make it to become billionaires. Or whatever he is, millionaire, I don't know. Now this was very unmotivating, I know, but I already told you in the beginning that I don't think this is 100% true. With all these negative sides, I still think that stories about achieving the impossible and the hero's journey essentially have a largely positive effect on us. They can mostly just motivate you because you can become one of those thousands of people, and even if you don't, maybe you'll achieve something that's not as great as becoming Steve Jobs, I don't know, but something that's still good. It can still make you become the best version of yourself. Embrace challenges, celebrate small victories, at least that's what the article said. And remember, happiness doesn't come from success, because happiness is sort of just gifted to you, which brings me to another question that I don't actually have an answer for myself. What good does success do? Honestly, I've been asking myself that. Maybe you have an answer for that in the comments. Is there some sort of deeper meaning? Is there like layers to happiness? I've been thinking about this, talking about this in therapy. I don't know, maybe you can talk about this with me, I don't know. Anyway, that was it for the video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I was sick last week. I actually had COVID. Yeah, I didn't know that still existed either, but I had COVID. I didn't like it very much, but I'm all better now. I'm negative, and I am back with another video a week too late, but who cares? Also, why did my last video Loki flop? Anyway, bye! I forgot to tell you guys to subscribe if you like the channel and like the video if you like the video. This is a book that I published with a short story contest that I recently found out I actually lost. It's a mystery thriller about a girl who killed her brother and in therapy figures out that it was her because she's in denial. It's really short and really expensive. You should still buy it though. If you want to hire me on Fiverr, go ahead and do that. Link is in the description. Follow me on Instagram. I have to do some promo because nobody's following me on Instagram. Yeah, I'm still very upset about the fact that I lost. So to get back at these people for making me lose, buy the book. Yeah, bye.